On the night of November 4th, Russia launched one of the largest and most brutal attacks against Ukraine in recent times. A total of 130 Shahed kamikaze UAVs and missiles, including Iskander-M missiles, tore through the skies of Ukraine. As always, the targets were civilian infrastructure. That night, the port infrastructure of Odessa and the Dnipropetrovsk region were living through hell. Ukrainians once again felt the cruelty of war deeply. Sirens, explosions, flames. However, Ukraine's revenge was instant and very brutal. Lukoil's South Russia's largest oil refinery in Volgograd, Russia's third largest thermal power plant in Kostroma, which feeds Moscow, an oil depot in Crimea, and most importantly, the Shahed drone base and depots that rained chaos on Ukrainian civilians. We will start with the major attack in Donetsk, because this is the main base for Ukraine's revenge. This is Donetsk, under occupation. Once one of Ukraine's most modern development projects, the international airport, under Russian occupation since 2015, this place had been transformed into a massive terror factory in recent months. On November 4th, this was the main center that sent those 130 Shaheds to Ukrainian cities. This was the main drone launch airbase that bombed Ukrainian cities, leaving millions of innocent people facing starvation and freezing temperatures. The main logistics center of Putin's terrorist army. Storage, assembly, and launch. It was all here. Ukrainian intelligence, particularly the 414th Separate UAV Brigade, led by Robert Madyar Birds, had been monitoring this site for months. The horrific attacks of the past few weeks had made the destruction of this center not a choice, but a necessity. And on the night of November 5th, the button was pressed. This operation was a military lesson. The Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, Unmanned Systems Forces, missile units, and artillery units all were perfectly coordinated. Both cruise missiles and attack UAVs began pounding the target simultaneously. The result? According to the SSO's own report, more than 90% of the Ukrainian UAVs launched hit their targets with precision. And then, this happened. This is the second massive explosion you see. So, what exactly exploded at Donetsk airport that night? According to reports that are still unconfirmed but based on serious intelligence channels, there were approximately 1,000 Shahed UAVs and more than 1,500 warheads belonging to them in that warehouse. 1,000 unmanned aerial vehicles, 1,500 warheads, in a single night, vaporized. This was a dagger plunged into the heart of Putin's winter offensive campaign. What you see here is the destruction of thousands of bombs that would have rained down on Ukrainian cities, thousands of potential civilian casualties, power outages, and homes left in the cold. And Ukraine didn't just strike the base where the UAVs were located. An ammunition depot was completely destroyed. A fuel storage facility was demolished. The drone launch preparation area at the airbase was rendered ineffective. Power and communications nodes were severely damaged. Now Putin can deploy hundreds of thousands of soldiers to the front. But if he cannot feed those soldiers, if he cannot provide them with ammunition and technological support, those soldiers will be nothing more than targets on the modern battlefield. Ukraine has broken this logistical backbone. But wait, if that were all, we would say, revenge was taken for the November 4th attack. However, that is not what made the night of November 5th historic. Putin's second shock was waiting much deeper. This is the town of Volgograd, just 350 kilometers northeast of Moscow. And this burning place is the Kostroma GRES, Russia's third largest thermal power plant. This is exactly 730 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. This is the official announcement of the failure of Putin's much-vaunted, layered, deep air defense doctrine. Why is this power plant important? It has an installed capacity of 3,600 megawatts. It is one of the most critical facilities in Russia's energy system. This facility is Russia's third largest thermal power plant. Let's look at the symmetry again. On November 4th, Putin planned to freeze Ukraine by striking the energy infrastructure in Odessa and Dnipropetrovsk. Just one day later, Ukraine responded by striking Russia's third largest thermal power plant. Putin now faces the threat of his own lights going out. Of course, the official statements were comical as usual. Kostroma governor Sergei Sitnikov claimed they repelled a drone attack. "There is damage to the energy infrastructure," he said, but immediately added, "The electricity supply has not been interrupted." Does this image resemble the "supply has not been interrupted" statement? These images, published and analyzed by the independent media outlet Astra, show a massive fire at the power plant's gas distribution facility. What could the governor say? "Yes, they hit us. One of the country's largest power plants is on fire, and we're about to freeze." Of course they'll lie. But images don't lie. The Russian people are watching those images too, and that people see the huge difference between the lie their leaders tell them that everything is under control and the fireball they see with their own eyes. And the symphony was complete. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. At the same timeline, Ukrainian UAVs were striking the Volgograd oil refinery owned by Lukoil in southern Russia. This is not just any refinery. It is the largest in southern Russia. It has an annual crude oil processing capacity of approximately 15.7 million tons. These figures may not mean much to you, so let me put it this way. This refinery accounts for approximately 6% of Russia's total production. Now look at the strategic symmetry. On November 4th, Putin struck Ukraine's energy and port infrastructure in Odessa. Just 24 hours later, Ukraine strikes one of Putin's largest oil refineries. This facility doesn't just supply gasoline to civilian vehicles. This facility produces the diesel that powers Putin's tanks in Ukraine and the fuel that powers his jets. But there was another consequence to this attack. A consequence Putin couldn't explain to his own people, one he tried to hide. Volgograd governor Andrei Bocharov was forced to make a statement. Yes, there had been a fire at an industrial facility, but more importantly, a 24-story apartment building had been damaged by falling shrapnel, and a 48-year-old civilian had lost his life. Now, let's pause. What did Putin tell the Russian people? This is not a war, this is a special military operation, right? And this operation was on Ukrainian soil. But now Russian cities were being shaken by Ukrainian attacks. This is the moment when the glass wall between Putin and the Russian people cracked. There's more. According to some claims circulating on social media, what hit that apartment building was not a Ukrainian drone, but a Russian Pantsir air defense missile fired at it. Can you imagine? Putin's million-dollar air defense systems are so panicked, so inadequate, that they either can't stop the drones or they strike their own cities. It's hard to decide which is worse. This is a clear picture of the helpless situation Putin finds himself in with his people. Revenge had been taken in Donetsk. The bill had been settled in Volgograd. That same night, Crimea, which Putin considers sacred, his homeland, was also burning. A large oil depot belonging to the company Crimean Eftezbit in occupied Simferopol was hit. Drones were recorded flying in the area before the explosions, and then a huge fire started. Crimea was supposed to be a fortress for Putin. Now it has also become a target feeding Russian military logistics. Let's look at the bigger picture to clarify what happened. On November 4th, Russia struck Ukraine's civilian infrastructure with 130 drones, devastatingly affecting Ukrainian civilians. On November 5th, Ukraine responded with force. Strategic retaliation was taken by destroying a logistics center with 1,000 drones in Donetsk. A huge refinery in Volgograd was hit, which was an economic response. A thermal power plant 730 kilometers deep in Kostroma was hit, causing Russia's doctrine collapse. A fuel depot in Crimea was hit, triggering logistical attrition. This is Ukraine's strategic genius. Why? Because these attacks put Putin in an impossible dilemma. What will Putin do now? Where will he use his limited number of expensive air defense systems? To protect the front line? Or to withdraw from the front and protect the Kostroma power plant 730 kilometers deep? Or the Volgograd refinery in the south? Or his own palace in Moscow? He cannot protect them all at once. He does not have enough resources. This is Ukraine's strategy. To force Putin to make impossible choices to protect his own territory in the war he created. And these attacks are working. This is not wishful thinking, it's mathematics. According to an analysis by the Kyiv Post, Ukraine's previous attacks on UAV production facilities and supply lines within Russia in July and August reduced the number of Shahed launches from 6,303 in July to 4,132 in August. That's a 33% decrease. Mathematically proven. These attacks are working. Now consider, after the attacks that caused that 33% drop, Russia tried to restock for the winter, and on the night of November 5th, that entire stockpile may have been destroyed in one go in Donetsk. Putin planned to freeze Ukraine on November 4th, but now his own plans are frozen. What was the Russian Defense Ministry's response? Predictable. We destroyed 75 Ukrainian UAVs overnight. 49 of them were over Volgograd. Really? If you shot down 75 drones, then how did the Kostroma power plant 730 kilometers away burn down? How was the Volgograd refinery hit? Did that warehouse in Donetsk, containing 1,000 drones, explode on its own? The Russian Defense Ministry's math, as usual, consists only of numbers that sound good to Putin's ears. Tonight, two different philosophies of war collided. Russia's philosophy was based on quantity, stockpiling thousands of cheap Shaheds in a central warehouse and overwhelming Ukraine with brute force. Ukraine's philosophy, on the other hand, was based on quality. Months of meticulous reconnaissance, the SSO, USF, Hungarian Birds, missile units, and artillery's flawless partnership. The SSO's claim of a 90% plus hit rate. The result? Russia's quantity of 1,000 UAVs was wiped out in a single night by Ukraine's quality operation. While Ukraine wages an asymmetric economic war by striking Russia's strategic assets, the resources Russia expends to halt these attacks create an economic attrition war working against Russia. Ukraine is forcing Russia to spend millions on its own defense. Previous attacks in Belgorod or Moscow were shocks, but the wave of attacks on November 5th to 6th achieved something different. It engraved the inevitability of war into the Russian civilian consciousness. The death of a 48-year-old civilian in Volgograd due to shrapnel and the damage to an apartment building took the war out of the special operation narrative and brought it into Russian homes. The suspension of flights at 13 Russian airports directly disrupted the lives of ordinary Russian citizens. Images of fires in Kostroma or Volgograd shattered the Kremlin's "the motherland is safe" narrative. There is no longer any safe place. The war had reached the very heart of Putin's promise of stability, the energy infrastructure. And this picture is part of a broader collapse. Around the same time, the Russian Freedom Legion, fighting for Ukraine, announced that it had destroyed dozens of locomotives carrying ammunition to Ukraine through a series of sabotage operations within Russia. Even more incredible, around the same time, electricity was cut off at Russia's pride and joy, the Vostochny Space Center, due to unpaid debts. The electricity to the Angara rocket launch complex was cut off because they couldn't pay the debt, which exceeded $650,000. Look at the picture. From the outside, Ukraine is hitting the most strategic energy facilities hundreds of kilometers deep. From the inside, Russian resistance fighters are sabotaging the war's logistical lines. The system is so rotten, so mired in corruption, that a space station, the symbol of Putin's dream of becoming a space power, cannot pay its electricity bill. And then there is the fourth most critical front, the front of allies. Putin's friends. What do you think those friends in Beijing, Tehran and Pyongyang see when they look at this scene? A strong man who promises to bring the West to its knees? Or a paper tiger who cannot protect his most critical power plant 730 kilometers underground, whose space station is plunged into darkness because he cannot pay his electricity bill? Think about it. Iran is giving Putin thousands of Shaheds, and Ukraine is destroying 1,000 of those Shaheds in a single night, before they can even be launched. What kind of return on investment is this for Tehran? China says unlimited friendship. North Korea is sending ammunition. But they all bet on Putin winning this war and changing the order. All they see now is a leader who cannot change the order, but rather cannot even maintain order in his own home. This weakness, this helplessness, is vaporizing all of Putin's charisma and credibility in the eyes of his allies. The picture is now clear. Putin is losing the war on the front lines, at home, economically, and in the eyes of his allies. The 1,000 UAVs that vanished in Donetsk on the night of November 5th, 2025, are not just a military loss. What vanished that night was Putin's authority. What vanished that night was the lie he told the Russian people. The war will not touch you. The real question is, How much longer will the Russian people silently watch this disaster and this humiliation their leaders have dragged them into? If what I shared in this video is valuable to you, don't forget to like it so that this effort reaches more people. We are witnessing these issues together. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Russia can overcome this crisis? Or is there no turning back now? And if you haven't joined us yet, you can subscribe to be with us for the next chapter of this story. Because this is not just a news feed. This is a moment of rupture happening right in the middle of history. See you soon. Stay safe.